Hello, everyone. I'm here with Mark Rozell, the Dean of the Schar School of Policy and Government here at George Mason University. He has agreed to do an interview today to talk about the upcoming presidential and, I guess, total election. We have a couple Senate and House races coming up as well. So we're ecstatic to have him here today. So, Mark, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And so I guess we'll start off with the first question. What are the biggest issues at stake in this upcoming election, both at the presidential level and at local and Senate election levels as well?
Yeah, thank you for that question and delighted to do this. And what I think are the biggest issues are not necessarily the same as what much of the public or perhaps many of our students think are the biggest issues in this campaign. But I want to emphasize that first, the public polling data suggests that, not surprisingly, state of the economy, inflation, the quality of life issues generally that drive voting behavior in America are at the top of the list, but also immigration policy is a big concern, abortion rights, and many of the other typical issues in American politics, which tend to be more domestic than international, that drive voting behavior, education and healthcare and the like. But I've noticed in some polling data that there's a bit more interest in this election cycle than typical for a United States national election in foreign policy issues. And I think a lot of that, of course, has to do with the Middle East, particularly Israel, Gaza. And much of that is having a big impact on, for example, the youngest voting cohort in the population. But I would add to that, from my perspective, that there are deep and abiding concerns about democratic institutions, their stability, the rule of law, belief in constitutionalism, separation of powers. A lot of these things have come up as political campaign issues, which in my 4 decades as a political scientist, in the past, I was used to there being a general consensus about the norms of our system, constitutionalism, the peaceful transfer of power. I'm deeply concerned about these, and I think these are very, very big issues on the ballot this year.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that you're seeing a different view, especially as you said on foreign policy. We're seeing that here on campus a lot. I think it's important to people. And speaking of on campus stuff, Virginia isn't necessarily the same type of swing state it was in the past. But what role do you see Virginia playing in this election, both at the presidential and at the Senate and congressional level as well?
Yeah, and I'm thankful that you asked about the legislative races because in a number of my interviews, people have just wanted to talk about the presidential race as though that's the entire election in the United States this year. Indeed, Virginia is not considered a swing state at the presidential level this year. The two presidential campaigns are paying very little attention to Virginia, which suggests they know that Virginia, well, is a solid blue state at the presidential level, at least. But down ticket, we have important races, a Senate race, all the House races. Two of them are considered among the very competitive races, the 7th and 10th districts. And the 7th in particular has been rated a toss-up. Now, that's critically important because there is such close partisanship in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. It is conceivable, perhaps even highly likely, that the Senate will be decided by a margin of one, for example, after this election is over, and the House of Representatives by merely perhaps a handful of seats nationally. So all of these races are critically important. Now, we at the Schar School have a poll that we do with the Washington Post. Our latest poll showed that Kamala Harris is well ahead in Virginia over Donald Trump. We'll be looking at down ticket as well later on. But I think voters have to be aware that even if you think your vote, quote unquote, doesn't count because Virginia is not considered one of the competitive states in the Electoral College, please look at the down ticket races, the local races. These things matter a great deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Virginia still plays a key role, as you mentioned, down ballot. I mean, Virginia may be a blue state on the federal level, but there is a Republican governor, there is a Republican lieutenant governor in Virginia. So we
Right.
see the impact of down ballot races have on people who live
Yeah,
here in Virginia as well.
exactly. And let me point this out too. If you don't like Donald Trump and he wins, you really care if at least one house of Congress is controlled by the Democrats because they would have the ability to stop his agenda the next 4 years. If you don't really like Kamala Harris, you'd care very deeply that the Republicans hold at least one, perhaps they have a better chance, I think, both houses of Congress the next 4 years to block her agenda. So the presidential race is not the whole ball game.
Absolutely. And I guess the third question I have for you is we all see it. There's constant campaigning. We all get the campaign text. We all see the ads on television. And we know there's political divisions in this country. So, and on campus especially. So, what is your advice to students and non-students who are worried that they can't express their political opinion, or they're worried about voting because they don't see things changing, or they see these political divisions and they're scared to express their views?
Yeah, and it's interesting you started the question talking about us being inundated with campaign information, and we're talking about this in Virginia. Imagine if you lived in Pennsylvania.
Oh, I know, because I do live in Pennsylvania, so I get the
Oh,
text constantly.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, there you go, right? So you're seeing it, and folks in Virginia are not seeing it as much, but I'm talking to Schar School students here who are
yeah,
from around the nation and around the world. So let me be
yeah.
clear about that, even though most of us are from Virginia.
Hmm.
But look, my view, no excuse for sitting this out, even if you're deeply discontented with the choice before you. Um, if you go issue by issue, and it wouldn't take a long time to figure this out. There's lots of good information from reliable sources online. You will see that there are very significant differences between these presidential candidates and serious consequences to have one outcome as opposed to the other. So if you're not happy with the binary choice that's there, I get that. I understand it. I have felt that way in many elections in my lifetime, but I never sat it out because there's always one that I'm a bit more worried about than the other. Um, in this election, maybe one I'm a lot more worried about than the other. You're never going to get perfect in our system. So get out there, be a part of the process, participate. Um, and you know what? If you think things are messed up, blame our generation. Not, you haven't had enough time to mess things up. You're all too young.
Yeah,
But get in there and get determined to fix things, right? It's your time, really. You're adults now, and your vote is just as good as mine, right?
yeah.
Um, get in there and be the change, make it happen.
Yeah, and we definitely encourage anyone who's watching this that we encourage you to vote. The whole point of having this show on election day is to encourage people to vote. To encourage people, I believe by the time the show airs, polls will still be open, so there'll still be time to heed this message and go out and vote and make a difference. Because even though you said Virginia is not a swing state, it still matters down ballot. It still matters at the congressional level, at the state level, at the Senate level. Um, on your decision to vote. So I want to thank Mark for joining us today. I want to thank everything that he's doing as well as the Schar School's doing. And we want to encourage all students here at Mason and all students, anybody who's watching this in Virginia and around the country, to go out and express their opinion and vote. So thank you very much, Mark, for joining
Great.
us today.
Thank you. And get out and vote, everyone. Good message.
Yes.